Well, good morning, everybody. First, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join the webinar today. As Sherry said, this is going to be a somewhat informal format today. There's several hundred people on today, so I need your help to make this webinar more successful. I'm going to be asking some questions throughout the presentation, and your responses in that QA chat are going to be noticed, and it'll help me focus on what's of interest to you, the audience. So your IVR, it's silent because it receives very little of your attention once it's up and running. It's deadly because every one of your customers hears it, and you don't know what that customer experience was like with your IVR. Today I'll be playing audio throughout the presentation. These are real examples that we've pulled for today's presentation, and hopefully they'll provide some insight into your customers' interactions within your IVR. So let's jump right into our first poll question. If I could get this working. All right, how do your callers interact with your IVR? Do they DTMF, speech, hybrid? Don't know. Please enter that into your QA chat so that I can see what's going on. Looks like we got a lot of DTMFs going. Hybrid, all right. Wow, I think moves fast. DTMF, DTMF. All right, so overwhelmingly DTMF. Don't know. Okay, great. Well, let's ask another question. What does your IVR do? There's only three things an IVR can do. It can identify a caller. It could try to understand the reason for the call and route it accordingly, or offer self-service where applicable. It's kind of the same thing your agents do, except it doesn't do them with such complexity to them. Next, I'm going to show you a simple call flow so we can get an understanding of that. Here is how you see the IVR, whether you're a call center manager, supervisor, maybe an agent, or someone who just has some familiarity with your IVR. Here's a real simple example of an IVR. A greeting, thank you for calling XYZ Corp. You get to the language or menu or the monitoring statement, para español, marque número 9. Your call may be recorded for quality purposes. And now, as we've seen here, you get to the main menu. And as we know, we've got three different types here. We've got speech main menus, directed dialogue, which is kind of like the hybrid, and DTMF, which is touch tone. So speech might say, if you're a speech IVR, might say, how can I help you today? If you're directed dialogue IVR, it's like main menu. You can say things like sales, make a payment, billing information, customer service, or something else. If you're a DTMF system, you might hear main menu. For sales, press 1. Make a payment, press 2. Billing information, 3. Customer service, 4. For anything else, just press 0. And here you can see that down the different routes, you go through sales to your sales agent or through service or something else to a service agent, and then down the payment billing path, you get into a sub-menu which might offer self-service. But this is how we designed it, how we drew it up. But next, we hand that off to our development team or our IVR vendor. And here's that exact same view, except now we're with our team or our vendor, and they come back with, where do you want the Barge-In turned on at? Can we press buttons or speak over menus within the system? Is there a universal opt-out on? What happens if a customer doesn't play with the IVR and it's just quiet? If you're a speech system, do I fall back to DTMF if I don't hear anything or I can't understand what they're saying? How many retries do I offer at each and every menu? Is there a max error count? What happens if one of the self-service applications fails? What do you want me to do? And if there's a network failure, what message do you want me to play? These are just a few questions that your IVR team or your development team or vendor may ask you. And finally, if you're not a 24/7 operation, what's the answer to all these questions outside of business hours? The big point here is that even the most simplest of designs like we have here have a lot going on behind the scenes. And call flow is just the tip of the iceberg. All right, one more poll here. Do you offer self-service in your IVR? Yes, no, don't know. So that's your QA chat again. Explodes. Yes, yes, yes. Lots of yeses. No. Yes, yes. Really? Not really. All right. But mostly yeses. Okay, great. So let's move on here. Now, we've looked at how we think the IVR looks. We've looked at how the development team thinks the IVR works. Now let's hear how the customers experience it.
Thank you. Please stay on the line until I've updated your records. Only take a few seconds. Okay, I've updated your records. Thank you for your payment. This transaction will take 1 to 2 business days to post to your account. Please use your account number and today's date as your confirmation number.
Okay, so that was a good experience where the caller calls in, makes a payment or something, gets their reference number. Now let's listen to a bad caller experience where speech recognition is not working and then Barge-In is turned off.
How may I help you?
Account balance and recent payments.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Para el español, oprima el 1.
Account balance and recent payments.
Say things like account balance.
Account balance.
Power is out. Or
Account balance.
How may I help you?
Account balance.
So here we had an example of where the caller was a little upset at first, but they got eventually where they needed to go. Now let's listen to the ugly, where this caller, she's been working in the IVR trying to get her question answered and is now a little heated.
For account balance. How may I help you?
Do I owe you any money?
Please hold while I transfer your call.
Oh, my God almighty.
So as you can hear, the IVR experience can vary greatly by customer, even though the IVR is programmed one way. So now that we've looked at the simple IVR flow, taken a brief look at what the dev team or vendor might ask us, and we've heard of some caller interactions within the IVR, let's talk about some best practices. IVR best practices are not all universal. Some will apply to your business, and some will not. But to the customer, from the customer's point of view, all of these practices are universal. And what do we mean by that? Well, some practices are unique to certain industries, such as if you're a police center and you're getting a phone call, you always tell the caller that the call is being recorded. Or if you work for a utility that has gas, you have gas emergencies right off the front of your IVR. It's like press 1 if you have a gas emergency. But if you're a credit card company, you're not having those kind of messages. Instead, you're trying to identify the caller. So everything's a little different. But your callers don't just call you or your industry. They call the gas company, the utility, the credit card company, the water department, the cable company. They call all over. So unlike what you normally do in business where you compare yourself to your competition, here you actually need to take into account what everyone is doing in their IVR space, because whatever's experience they're experiencing with those different industries is what they're going to expect out of you. So let's look at some of these best practices. Come down. All right, here we go. First best practice, keep it simple. Callers listen to the options one by one. If your list of options is too long, they may lose track of the options and need to listen to the list again. So don't list more than 3 to 5 options at one time. Often callers need to repeat the menu. So if you're in a voice system, allow them to say repeat that. Or if you're in a DTMS system, press 7 to repeat the menu. Do you know how many options are in your main menu? If you're in a speech system and the caller doesn't play, do you inform them of the hidden the menu? So behind a speech system, everyone's listening for keywords. Do you help them out by giving them directed dialogue? In today's world, we've all heard about distracted driving. Do you think the caller's paying 100% attention to your IVR? Menus need a repeat option. You should state at the top menu that you can repeat all menus just by saying repeat or pressing 7, for example. From our experience, doing this adds 1 to 3% self-service utilization. Second one is allow your callers time. Give the callers time to respond. At main menus, short amount of times are good. We recommend 3.5 to 4 seconds per section, unless you're asking them for ID or some piece of information from documentation. Then you're going to need to do a lot for a few more seconds, or offer a wait time message. But when they get into a submenu, you need to lengthen that wait by about a second, because now they have to think a little more. Also, if the caller is speaking or keying, have the IVR wait until they're done. I can't tell you how many calls I listen to where the IVR starts speaking over a caller. And when IVRs do that, that means they've moved on to the next part of the call flow, but the caller's still answering the prior part. If the caller's answer makes no sense at that advanced place, ask them if they want to go back. Give them an option to go back up the menu tree. Next, if you're in a complicated business, expect the caller to have to think rather than react to what the IVR is saying to them. People who are calling about something they don't completely understand need a little more time. If you're asking a question that requires greater thought than yes or no, then give the caller about 5 seconds to respond instead of just the normal amount of time. Next best practice is when to allow Barge-In. So we heard some Barge-In earlier. Let's just start by playing the Barge-In.
You can say things like account balance, my power is out, or moving. How may I help you?
My power went out.
Sorry, I didn't get that. You can say things like account balance, my power is out, or moving. How may I help you?
My power is out.
Please hold while I transfer your call.
So here, the caller initially starts to respond prior to the message ending. But Barge-In was off, so the IVR didn't understand the part of phrase it got. But this caller, he's smart. He waits and then until the second time when the IVR finishes speaking and then gives his response. Well, if the caller wants to begin to respond to the prompt before it's finished, you should let them, especially in something like this. Or you need to communicate to the caller that they're going to need to wait until the IVR menu is over before they start to respond. Barge-In is very important in both speech and DTMF systems. It's an effective tool for your callers who dial in often and don't need to listen to all the prompts, as they know your IVR tree probably better than you do. Speech systems are prone to background noises. As mobile phone technology has gotten better, the microphones on those devices have too. So turning off Barge-In in some place allow you to communicate more clearly and reduce your error outs to the agents. Here's a controversial one. Let customers skip to an agent. I'm going to play you two examples here of a customer experience. It's the exact same IVR, but the experience is completely different. Let's listen.
I am an automated assistant. How may I help you?
Operator.
I understand you want to talk to a customer service representative. I may be able to help you.
Operator.
You can say things like account balance, payment
Operator.
plan, or moving. How may I
Operator.
help you?
Operator.
Please hold while I transfer your
Okay,
call.
so that was a speech. Now let's listen to the DTMF.
I am an automated assistant. How may I help you? I understand you want to talk to a customer service representative. I may be able to help you. You can say things like account balance. Please hold while I transfer your call.
So, all right. The first caller is forced to wait through the messaging as audio Barge-In is definitely turned off, and you can hear the caller get frustrated. Whereas the second caller calls the exact same IVR, presses 0, and then presses 0 again and gets exactly what they asked for. Why is the experience so much different? So we've been listening to calls for a long time, and we suggest that you allow people to skip the IVR after ID. I mean, everyone wants to know who they're speaking to, but there are some customers who only want to speak to an agent. And this, you should provide the agent opt-out option at the beginning. So it doesn't have to be completely obvious, but it should be there. So in other words, you could say press 1 for sales, 2 for service, 3 for something else, wait 2 seconds, and then say, or press 0 to get to an agent. And that's all it has to be. And again, we recommend after they've ID'd to allow them to opt out. And moving along, our fifth one is maintain the information flow. I can't tell you how many times this happens. Tracking the information that's gathered in the IVR speeds up the process and makes it more efficient. So information gathered in the IVR can be stored and recalled throughout the IVR. Then when the call is passed to the agent space, screen pop or CTI enables the agent to just verify the person who's called in and not have to authenticate them all over again. This will speed up your processor, and it's also what the caller is expecting. Here's the very first chance you can actually meet your caller's expectations. Let's listen to this call here. Rewind this one.
The way through your stupid automated system, it took the account number, recognized who I was, but it gives you like 2 seconds to come up with your routing number, and then it kicks you out of the system. I just want to pay this bill and be done with it.
Okay. I'm still looking for your account.
Wow. Disgusting. Would you need any other information? Because I have an XBAR bill right in front of me. What else would you need?
No, that would be it.
Yeah.
So here's a caller who's played with the IVR, entered in the information, and failed to an agent. Obviously, they've already done the greeting. And now we're back to the authentication piece of the call. And you can hear it in the caller's voice. He's being a little sarcastic about the fact that... And that took 20 seconds of time to get through. So this experience isn't the best. And the caller plays along. He knows it's not the agent's fault, probably, but he's not happy. So his perception of the experience is degrade your customer service or your customer satisfaction scores.
Welcome to WebEx. Enter your access code or meeting number. Enter your attendee ID number.
So for those of you who do have the messaging, you want to limit those. And I recently worked with a client who announces an estimated wait time as you enter their queue. It tells you that your estimated wait time is 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Well, it doesn't matter what message you heard. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds into your wait time, you hear this message that comes up. Your call is important to us. Please continue to hold. And that message repeats every 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The problem that we observed was that 50% of the callers hung up at the first plane of that menu, regardless of what time they were told they were going to wait. So we recommended pulling that out of there. I mean, this call basically at 3 minutes and 30 seconds in has already cost you in service level, and now it's hitting your answer rates. But by removing that message, at least you were able to recover your answer rates. And if they do hang up, or if they do hang on, they're probably upset, and it's going to cost you some agent time, just like we heard in that last call. So be transparent about the wait times, and callers will arrive less upset to the agent. Also, maybe you can offer them a call back at a later time. I know that's going on a lot these days. Inform the caller of the wait time when they enter the queue, and it allows them the choice of either waiting or hanging up. Also, the mystery's been lifted on how long they'll be served, how long they'll wait to be served. And also, you need to QA these automated messages. The systems that predict wait times have gotten much better and more accurate in recent years, but you still need to check to make sure they're accurate. Which leads us into best practice number 7. Evaluate your IVR. Your IVR needs to be tuned up periodically. Voice systems need voice tuning. DTMS systems need question tuning. How often does the development team or IVR vendor check the tuning in your speech system? DTMS systems need tuning as well. Word choice is very important. as well as the amount of time you give the caller to respond to your query, as we've already discussed. Regularly review and evaluate your IVR. Are callers hanging up in your IVR? Consider tweaking the layout and the options. There are things that are in your control. The question is, do you have the time or can you make the time to do them? You need to understand your IVR reporting. Not getting the results you're striving for from an application? Do a pilot. That's the easiest way. Change the IVR in one section or application for 4 weeks. Then compare the results to the prior experience. If the results are better, leave the changes in place and move on to the next section or the next application. If they're not as good, you can always roll the code back. Testing. Have someone call your production system. Scripts are great for testing, but you need a variety of them because there's a lot in your IVR. But going off script will shed new light. And of course, human tests work best. And it's even better if you can find someone who's not familiar with your IVR. Best practice number 8 is learn from your mistakes. Provide options on information entry. So if you're in a speech system, your first try could be using voice recognition, but then the second attempt could be using a keypad to key in numbers. This will help with the translation and communications issues. If you have a speech system, directed dialogue often works better than open speech. When using directed dialogue, allow the customer to press like 1 for the first option that you gave them in case they forgot the verbiage you want them to say back to you. Speech systems, and the other one is here. If voice entry, numeric identification is easier to understand than alphanumeric. So speech systems understand numbers much better than letters. If your product or service has a unique identifier that is numeric only, ask for that. Here we also have, if customers are having difficulty with an IVR prompt, offer different wording. In your IVR reports, you can see which prompts are played more than others that precede them. Have you ever heard those prompts? Do they make sense to someone who's not an expert in your business? Play them for your spouse or significant other. Is there jargon being used, or is the information that's being given to the caller unclear? So here's an interesting call, actually. There's a couple things going on here that's interesting, but let's listen to what the caller does.
Okay, please tell me the date you would like us to end your service.
June 31st.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Using your telephone keypad, please enter the date you'd like us to use using 2-digit month, 2-digit day, and 2-digit year.
Well, first, the caller says that she'd like it on June 31st. Well, there is no June 31st. But the IVR at least has a nice fallback plan in place where it then asks her for a 2-digit month, a 2-digit day, and a 2-digit year. So the appropriate planning worked out here. So that must have been a learn from a mistake. And in fact, we're learning from the customer's mistake. Number 9 is personal touch. So do you have a more advanced environment? Some callers may be calling for the same issue as their last call, whether they're making a regular monthly payment over the phone or still experiencing an issue. Do you recognize the number that's calling? Look them up in the CRM. And if they've called recently, ask if they'd like to repeat the purchase from before, or ask if they're calling back about a recently opened or closed case. Could you greet the caller? Consider greeting repeat callers. Hello, Rick. Are you calling about the issue reported with XYZ service? This adds a personal touch and gets them to the right agent faster. One client that we've worked with changed their IVR from having the caller authenticate and then state their reason to the IVR for why they're calling, which involved a possible misroute, to the IVR actually doing this, where they greeted the caller, asked if they're calling about a recent issue that they found in the CRM. Now, the original calls used to take about 2 minutes for them to get routed. Now it takes just 35 seconds. That makes it so much easier for the customer, and the customers appreciate it. And it reduces also the amount of misroutes that are going to happen since you know exactly what they want and exactly what the issue was last time. All right, one more quick poll question. Do you think or know that your IVR releases callers accidentally? Yes, no, that's all we're looking for here. Let's see. No. Yes. All right. We're getting a whole yes, a lot of yeses. No's, don't know. All right. That's good. Okay. Well, let's see what I've got for you for this one. Well, this one seems obvious, but it's harder than you think. Best practice number 10, avoid hanging up on callers. Don't allow your IVR system to hang up on customers. Now, it sounds easy, but it's actually pretty hard because some callers try to avoid the IVR in an effort to reach a live agent. As we all know, they pound out or zero out. And some IVRs actually hang up on these customers. So you actually need to plan for callers who fail to input responses to the IVR or do unpredictable things. Not allowing your IVR to release a call is difficult. And every client I've worked with, it happens to daily. And there's a long list of reasons. Design, QA, network faults, meshing of systems, programming issues, transferring to a voicemail box that's full, or even transferring between IVR platforms can all cause for faults where the IVR releases the call. These issues are buried deep in your IVR and are counted actually as contained calls most of the time. You need expert skills and time to find these calls and all the other types that we've listed today. The question is, do you have the tools and do you have the time? So let's see here. Let's play this last call, see what happens with this person.
I need to talk to someone about my account.
Please hold while I transfer your call.
So allowing up to 3 failed attempts or transferring to a live agent, or at least giving them, I've not heard any responses if they fail to play, is something we recommend. Here's a quick review of some topics we've covered today. Understanding these points will help you understand your caller's IVR experience and give rise to your awareness of them. So, as we saw earlier, what options are there for opt-outs? What are your maximum retries set to? Is Barge-In set, and if so, where? Are your queues blind or transparent? Do you know what the queue experience is? Is your information that you've gathered in the IVR being passed to your agents? What self-service applications are there? And what's their success rates? And finally, the most important one is to QA the IVR regularly, even when things appear to be going smoothly in the IVR. And that's where we come in. Evoke shines a bright light into the IVR, revealing the hidden dissatisfiers, and partner with you to have continued success in your IVR space. We offer end-to-end insights, automatic categorization of calling and trends. You can jump straight to interesting calls and to events within the calls without having to listen to the whole thing. Observe real customer behavior and experience. Listen inside the IVR, the agent, all your partners, and transfers. We follow your call from dial to disconnect. So I'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. Hope you've learned something new, or you've remembered some things that you may have forgotten. And if you'd like to contact us to learn more about Evoke, it's on the screen. Please call or email us. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. And we are now going to jump right into the questions because a whole bunch of them have come in while you were speaking. So the first one, how does analyzing a caller's interaction in the IVR help to understand the overall customer experience?
Sure. That's a great question. The IVR is a piece that's often overlooked when gauging the customer experience. I mean, you record your agents and you try to gauge it from there, but you actually miss the first experience. And it can vary widely, as you've just heard. Being able to shape the experience prior to that caller getting to an agent is key. Will drive up the satisfaction for your company, possibly increase your self-service rates, and at the very least, lower your agent handle time. You have another question?
I do. In regards to the call flow charts at the beginning of the presentation, there seems to be more to consider when building an IVR than meets the eye. Let's see, do you believe this to be a significant area to evaluate?
Oh, absolutely. Call flows are very important. The fewer steps it takes a customer to get their issue resolved, the better. It's all about how much effort they're putting in. But the better question to ask yourself is, how does the call flow work from the caller's perspective? You're looking at it from the company's perspective. And is there something you can do to make it easier for the caller to accomplish the intended goal when calling you?
Let's see. How often do you see an IVR hanging up on a caller? And how am I able to recognize it when it's happening?
Well, I said earlier, I see it every day for all my clients. It happens multiple times, either at the phone network, like before they get to you, or when they hit your switch, or I've noticed some bad programming in IVRs, or even when they transfer from the IVR to the queue. But without a system to monitor all the areas of the call, you're blind to this. To recognize it happening, you need a solution like what we present here at Evoke to capture calls in the network and that record calls, the calls from dial to disconnect.
How do you see most companies measuring the success of IVR self-service?
Sure. Well, most companies at the beginning of the engagements with us typically measure self-service by counting the number of people that enter a self-service application and either hang up within it or exit that application, and they consider that success. And that's really without understanding any of what happened in between those things. What you really need to know is, were these people successful in getting the information they're looking for within that application? Sometimes you can enter an application without actually getting any information that's actionable for the caller, or something that's already been presented to them earlier in the call. So to improve self-service, you kind of need complete visibility into the IVR and the customer experience, which can also mean that you probably need to revisit your metrics and ask whether these metrics are more customer-centric or not.
In your opinion, is it a good idea to hide the option to speak to an agent and force them into self-service to reduce costs?
In my opinion. Well, it's more about what the goal is of the corporation. So I've heard companies where their agents are unable to take payments because they view it as a way to protect personal information. So they require all payments that are being made to agents be made to the IVR instead. So there, I think you can get away with it, as long as you've trained the caller population, the calling population. But doing it in other places typically will infuriate your callers, as they are trying to get an answer to a question and they want to speak to someone, and yet you keep directing them back into a self-service application.
I've heard of some companies recording the IVR portion of the call, which enables them to hear the customer's candid comments. Is that easy to set up?
Well, I believe there are some of the recording vendors that do that. I don't know how easy it is for them to set up. For us, it takes takes very little time in architecture. For us, it all happens up in the cloud, and then the recordings are made available to you on a website. So it's very easy.
Is there a recommended number of options, or what is considered too many options, including submenus?
Sure. Too many options. Again, I fall back to this 3 to 5. Anything over 5, and customers begin to forget what they heard again, or they're distracted. I mean, nobody's paying 100% attention to anything these days. So when you give them a long list, they're going to either forget or miss something. So, and like I said before, adding the repeat the menu option is important.
I don't know if you're familiar with any of this, but a couple of people have asked about some studies on demographics of who's likely to skip the IVR, like baby boomers or millennials? Do you have any feel for that?
Yeah, I can't say that I know the demographics on who skips. I read the industry papers like you all do. We know millennials would prefer to use a self-service application, and I can speak for the Gen Xers. I like to use a self-service application and only go to the agents when I have to. But there's still the silent generation and the baby boomers that expect service and like to speak to agents as opposed to the automated messaging. So I'm afraid you and I will have to study our trade papers a little more to get the answer for that.
Okay. What metrics do you recommend for monitoring how efficient the IVR is?
Sure. Well, when I was in the IVR space before I had a system like Evoke, it was all about the number of calls that came in and the number of calls that went to agents, and we had a containment rate. But I also tried to go in and eliminate callers who hung up early, so where the call time was low. But, that's all you can pretty much get out of your IVR reports. If you have a lot of recording places where you're counting how many people pass through the various turnstiles in your IVR, then it's a matter of sitting down and getting very familiar with your reports and trying to map out your own call flow to understand just how well things are going. Evoke will help you measure those without having to go and memorize your call flows, and will tell you what your self-service rates are, not only who abandoned the IVR, but what your self-service rates are. It's very hard to get that otherwise, but that's what you really want to go for is, are people hanging up in the IVR or are people actually self-serving in the IVR?
Can you discuss some of the benefits combining the service level of the IVR to all of the queues?
Combining the service level of the IVR to all of the queues. So I guess I'm going to have to take that. I'm guessing I'm going to have to take that from what I think it's saying. So service level in the IVR, so if 50% of the callers are being serviced in the IVR, then I'm having a 50% success rate, and then 50% are going to agents, and trying to get that service level up. Is that the question? Can you ask the questioner?
Yeah, if the person that put that in, if they can just explain what they're looking for a little bit more. So while they answer, let's go on to our next one. How do you feel about making prompts fun so customers stay engaged? When you use humor in a prompt?
Well, it depends upon your business. I wouldn't recommend it if you're in public space or government space. But I do remember, I forget who it was, like 15 years ago, you could call, I want to say one of the photography places where you get prints made, and you could have the IVR speak to you as a pirate, and the entire menu was like a pirate. Now, it was fun, but I wouldn't recommend it for if you're trying to portray a professional level of engagement. But if you're doing something fun like pictures or vacations, you could probably get away with it.
Okay, going back to that other question, the benefits combining service level of the IVR to all the queues, you were correct what you assumed they meant. So how do you increase the service level in the IVRs? Well, I think that's the question. Can you read the question again for me, Sherry? Sure, they're coming in so fast I need to find it again. It was, let me see, combining your service level of the IVR with your queues.
With your queues, okay. All right, so if a certain application is giving you maybe 70% productivity, like a payment application, but, you have another application where it's, for instance, I've seen in places where, hey, your payment application's great. I get 70% self-service and only 30% of callers fail out to an agent. But then there's other places like change address, which gets 5% success and then 95% fall out to an agent. We wouldn't tell I wouldn't tell you to spend any more time on that at this point. The technology just isn't good enough. Allow those callers, don't hassle them, allow them to fail down to an agent, but spend your time in the payment application where maybe you can get another 5 or 10% because there's probably more callers calling to make a payment. So I would focus on the IVR pieces that most callers are going down in order to get 1 or 2 percentage points as opposed to a queue or a application that isn't being accessed very often to get the most bang for your buck.
Okay, there's a funny comment here about using humor. Someone suggests Affleck, when you call them, you hear a duck quack. So that could be cute. Can you talk a little bit, when you're testing your IVR, between a manual test and an automated test?
Sure. When I worked in the call center space, we used to have a third-party vendor make calls into our IVR, and it would navigate through the same 3 or 4 paths, and it would get to an agent, and the agents were instructed, they get this, you're getting XYZ company test call, and the agents then needed to transfer that call to a certain queue, and if that didn't happen if that didn't happen for 2 or more test calls in a row, I used to get text messages saying that there's a failure happening in the IVR. So that's one way to have an automated system do it. But at the same time, in that same environment, I used to have a clipboard that got passed around, and every 15 minutes, agents were placing calls into the IVR, and they had different routes. There was 5 different scripts they would follow to make sure that the various applications within our IVR was actually working. So not only was I using manual, I was using an automated test because the automated test can only do so much. And actually, we wound up catching several things using the agent tests, even though the agents wind up getting kind of numb to it. And what I'd actually do is I would, whenever I had a visitor, I'd force them to do test calls so that way I could get a different perspective.
Are there certain metrics that you recommend for monitoring the efficiency of the IVR that IDs the customer?
Well, yeah, so it's all about how many callers are asked or prompted to authenticate or ID, and then it becomes, okay, and how many callers after that ask actually went to a self-service application. So that's one thing you can do is say, okay, out of 100 callers that came into the switch, 50 of them were prompted to authenticate, and 40 of them actually went to a self-service application. So my success rate is, 80% at the authentication prompt. But the question is, what's going on with the other 50, and trying to figure out how to get them to authenticate. So I guess those are the kind of metrics I look for in your environment, not knowing any more than what I just heard.
What's your opinion on agents silently assisting recognition in the background?
Yeah, if you can afford to do that, sure. But a well-designed IVR system does not need human intervention. That kind of defeats the purpose. What you're looking for is you're looking to do just what I said the IVR does, which is identify the caller, understand the reason for their call, and then route them to the proper place, which is all an agent does. So if you're going to have the agents up front helping, you might as well just send them to the agents.
Okay. Let's see. My customers want to disconnect callers if they don't make a selection instead of transferring them to an operator. So then that cuts down on call volume. What is your advice? Do you tell the caller they're going to be disconnected, or just disconnect them?
Oh, you never just disconnect someone. I mean, the cost of acquisition of a caller or a customer is so high, but you want to. Well, I guess I need to understand how you got them to that place. If they're just zeroing out the whole time and wanting to speak to an agent, there comes a point where you can just say, I understand you'd like to speak to an agent, and maybe all they do is keep pressing zero. But I would, if that's all they're doing, then I would let them get to the agent, because either I have some business with them, or I've done business with them, or they want to do business with me, and I don't want to have to pay to reacquire that customer.
Does your product integrate with all phone switches?
Yes, there's no problem with integration of any phone switch of any kind.
Okay, good. And since we're coming up to the end of our session, Rick, what I'd like you to do is, there are a lot of really good points and things to look at, and some things we know and some things we forgot we even knew. So if you can just summarize your session, like what are the things that we really need to remember?
Sure. Things I'd say you need to really remember are, even though you work in the call center space, you need to understand your IVR, because your first contact with the customer is the IVR. And actually, I know from the call center space, you tell your agents this all the time, you're the voice of the company. Well, really, the IVR is the voice of the company. And unfortunately for the IVR, there's a whole team of people behind it programming that voice. So just understand what's going on in there. Understand that it's from the customer's perspective, you need to observe it, and make it less effort for the customer to get their question answered.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Rick, for this presentation. Thank you, Evoke, for bringing this presentation to the journey of the connected customer.